welcome to Regional Property Unplugged. We've had a week off and it feels a little bit strange actually to be back on the bike. So welcome, and we have a guest today, James Golsworthy from James Golsworthy Consulting. He's a town planner, and I was lucky enough to be able to work with James a fair few years ago, and so I know a little bit about this, and I thought this is actually some really cool information that we can share with the audience today. So yeah, welcome James.
Thanks, Shona.
No worries. We'll just do a little recap on what's happening with property, Mark, just to let everyone know, because we had that couple of weeks off. So what's been happening?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting time in the market. At the moment, we really, across the board, there's a lack of stock coming on the market, which is a bit unusual. So we're finding that we have buyers begging for something to go into. You know, we've spoken a lot about over the past 6 months, you know, a lot of people are looking for a change for whatever reason, you know, having spent time sort of locked down in their house, you know, they've realised certain things about what they want and what they don't want. There's definitely a lack of stock. There's still a lot of buyers. We're still getting super results, a lot of competition because of that, you know, real lack of supply. The demand's high, and we're seeing our vendors are still getting unexpected results, which is very positive. It means the market's still going ahead. So if there are sort of clients out there or homeowners out there that are, you know, sort of thinking it's not the right time to sell, then I think absolutely, you know, usually we do see a bit of a glut come on the market in spring. Not the case this year. So it's interesting times in the market. But yeah, lots of buyer activity. You know, we've been doing plenty of inspections, following on from how many we're doing last month. We're still only able to do private inspections, no open homes as yet. It means we get our Saturdays, which is kind of nice, but it is a lot easier. But auctions are permitted, so we can have on-site auctions. I've got one Friday that I had to sadly postpone on Friday to this Friday. But yeah, there's plenty of action, and yeah, it'll be an interesting sort of run through to Christmas from here, I think.
That's good. That's awesome. And we've got, you know, land is sort of running out too. So I thought this would be a really good opportunity for James to come on, because people are talking about subdividing and stuff, and not everyone can just, you know, subdivide and for people to have land to build on. So this would be really cool. So James, you've had like over 20 years experience in regional Victoria and other states as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience with town planning?
Yeah, thanks, Shona. Yeah, so mainly in regional areas of Victoria and New South Wales, 20 years in local government and management, and then also consulting and running my own business for probably almost the last sort of 15 years, I suppose, and really just focusing in on development in those regional areas, and basically facilitating, you know, the approvals that are required for different forms of development, and planning for the future in some instances, I suppose, too, in terms of you know, rezoning of land and the like.
So that sort of brings us to, like, what is town planning really, and, you know, why is it required? Yeah,
often people just say, oh, you're drawing roads and roundabouts and, you know, planning
bloody roundabouts.
Yes.
And then other people who have had an experience with town planners may not necessarily have too much of a high opinion of them, because it's probably when they're striking a bit of a challenge in getting something through at a council. But in its broader sense, I suppose, planning's about you know, land use and development, and on that sort of longer term horizon in terms of you know, making sure that there is enough land, I suppose, for different forms of development, whether it be residential or commercial or industrial, or probably something that's often quite topical is the protection of farming land, and making sure that that's not impacted from any sort of inappropriate development, I suppose. So just planning for that, and then making provision for the necessary infrastructure services, such as your drainage, your water supply, sewage, good roads, and that sort of thing. And then you lead on to sort of community facilities that are required to serve the population, whether it be schools or universities or shops or any of those sorts of things, as well as protecting sort of natural areas. So in its highest sort of sense, it's about sort of that higher level sort of future planning.
Yeah, cool. So getting to the subdivision, so can all land be subdivided for residential purposes?
Yeah, so that, I suppose, depends upon, firstly, the zoning of the land and whether or not you've got your land included within a residential style of zone. So if you are in a residential zone, often there's another layer of control that relates to how you can subdivide, what the minimum lot size is, whether or not there's any contributions that need to be made to council or to local water authorities and that sort of thing. So often people, when they have land, they think it may be able to be subdivided, and in some instances it can be. But then in other instances, there are restrictions in terms of, yes, you can do it, but it's got to meet these sort of requirements and parameters. And I guess that goes back to that sort of future longer term planning, where an area might be identified for, larger lots like rural residential, rather than, typical traditional residential of smaller lots around that 400, 500, 600 square metre mark.
Yeah.
James, if you're, for anyone listening, if you've got a block or a farm around St Razor, what's the minimum, maximum size it needs to be to then be able to subdivide a lot off that? So, you hear a lot of farmers saying, well, I've got 21 acres, 22, 23, 25. What does it need to be? Is it specific to the area around St Razor, or is it just a general rule? You hear a lot of conflicting reports on the actual sizes, etc. Is there an easy answer for that one?
There's probably one easy answer, is that it depends upon what municipality that you're in, and it also depends upon what state you're in. But typically, if you've got farming land and you want to subdivide a vacant lot off, typically it's quite difficult to do that unless you've got a house that you can subdivide off. And sometimes you're able to do that, sometimes you're not. Typically, if it's been done before, maybe you're not allowed to do it again. And typically, like I say, you're not allowed to subdivide a vacant lot off, because that comes back to that sort of protection of farming land, I suppose. And that's not planning 101, is that it's identified for farming, not residential purposes.
So if you've got a house, if you've got a 30-acre property and you've got a house on that property, you may be able to subdivide the house off, separate the farm, and then you're not impacting the size of the farm, but you're literally just subdividing the house off, maybe selling the farm to a neighbour and staying in the home. So that can be done. Is there a minimum size there?
Typically that's able to be done, obviously subject to all your approvals and that sort of thing. Basically the principle of that is that you're providing for the retirement of the landowner and the farmer, and an opportunity for that land to be farmed in some sort of sold to the neighbour, or someone who's congregating a larger farm, I suppose. So that's often they'll let you do that, subject to sort of tying the land up and not being able to build any further houses on the balance of land, which is often the case.
Yep. Okay.
So purchasing a piece of land that has that doesn't have a planning permit approval to build on it, but how sometimes it's advertised that it could be, is that dangerous?
Normally, it depends upon the zoning of the land. If you're talking about residential, or often it's not really too much of a risk if it's residential land, but if it's farming land or some other sort of different type zoning land, it is sometimes a little bit of a challenge, and normally often a real estate agent would put the STCA there, and I think that's probably a bit of a flag for you just to do a little bit of homework and maybe, go seek some advice about whether or not you can do what you're wanting to do.
Yeah.
And then often it might be the case that you obtain some sort of planning approval prior to you actually buying the place.
Yeah, cool. So do all builds need a planning permit approval?
Typically in a residential zone for a house or a single house on a block of land, it doesn't normally need a planning permit, but it most likely will almost always will require a building permit.
Yeah.
And then once you get into a farming area or an area that's a little more sensitive, might have some overlays or some controls about flooding or environmental sensitivity, typically you require a planning permit for that.
Yeah, cool.
So I'm on a half acre. It's considered farming. We are potentially looking to do some renovations. We actually need to apply for a planning permit based on the fact that we're not supposed to build within 5 metres of the fence line because we're considered a farm, but our whole width of the land is about probably 30. So it makes it a bit difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And in Victoria, there is a thing called VicSmart, which often is a bit of a fast tracking, more streamlined sort of proposal for situations such as yours.
Yeah.
And in New South Wales, there's a matter called a compliant development certificate. And I suppose what each of those do is acknowledge the fact that those sorts of proposals are a little simpler and really won't impact upon the adjoining landowner, and subject to meeting requirements, that the approval comes through a lot more quickly, and often that can be in a matter of a week or two.
That's
Okay,
cool.
Good to know.
That's really cool. So what permits are needed for changes to property? Obviously what Mark just mentioned, but even if we're in town, like sheds, driveways, pools, do we need planning permits for that, or is it just building permits?
Yeah, often in town, you won't need a planning permit for those sorts of things unless there's a special sort of a control over that land. But you will definitely need a planning permit for a building permit for new builds. And then often there's other approvals, I suppose, that's required from the council or the water authority for new driveways and those sorts of things. So there's sometimes a fair bit of red tape in order to get a house built or to get a development over the line. And really it's just a matter of planning for that into the future, and I suppose seeking some advice, whether that's speaking to a professional or just knocking on the door of your council and going to ask the appropriate questions.
Yeah, cool. I have a question too. When you're buying, say you're buying a property that has a planning permit approval for maybe like in the rural areas for an extension or to build a property on, and it hasn't actually gone, they sell it before it happens. The planning permits actually expire, don't they?
Yep, they've got a...
Yeah. So how long have you got for a planning permit?
Yeah, normally for a planning permit in Victoria, it's 2 years for you to start. And then in New South Wales, typically it's 5 years to make a start. In Victoria, the 2 years can vary a little bit, and you can also request an extension of time. Subject to council's consideration, it may be extended, and often if there's a new landowner coming on board, council will look at that a little more favourably. In New South Wales, typically there's no opportunity for extension of time beyond that 5 years. So yeah, it's something that's pretty important when you're purchasing a property to sort of have a look at that, do some homework, and clearly understand what permissions may be there, and really get a copy of the approval so as you can see for yourself what the expiry date is.
Can you make changes to an approval? Like after they've purchased it and they go, okay, I like this, but I kind of want to change it, tweak it a little bit. Can you do that?
Absolutely. Yep. That's something that you can make an application for a modification or an amendment for the approval to the council. And typically, if it's in the same vein as what the original approval was, that's not normally too much of a problem.
Excellent, cool. Just to move on a little bit, like development covenants, this is sort of a question that I was sort of, keeps whirling around in my head, is like, why do they do it when you obviously do planning permits for developments, huge developments like the marina, for example. Why do they have covenants? Like, what are they for, and why are they in place?
Yeah, so covenants are often listed on the title for a parcel of land, and they can do any number of different things. They are typically placed on the title by a developer or someone who's wanting to protect the land for a particular purpose. And typically in a residential subdivision, it might be in relation to the quality of the home, or the size of the home, or its materials, or that there's no sort of industry happening on the land. In other instances, it might protect native vegetation, such as Trust for Nature, for example, place covenants on the land. So you'll be able to build a house, but you need to protect the vegetation and maintain it into the future. So covenants are there for any number of different reasons, and once again, you need to do your homework and check the title to make sure that there's or whether or not there is anything there, and seek some advice as to what restrictions that may place on the land. Councils also, when you're going for an approval, they might require that they'll give you the approval, which is subject to placing a restriction on the title, and that might mean that you can't build another house, or you can't subdivide the land any further, sort of thing. So they're a similar sort of thing as a covenant, which is often referred to as a restriction, and that's really something that is pretty important, because you might buy the parcel of land and you can't do what you want to do on that land.
Yeah, exactly.
James, again, going off topic, a big business is looking to come to Mildura. They want to establish a factory, or something that's great for our region and our economy. Do they employ you to? They say, right, we're coming to Mildura. Is this what they do? They employ you to actually do all the groundwork, liaise with council, make sure that if there's certain restrictions or anything that they need to abide by, you're there to liaise, hold their hand through the process. Is that something that you've done in the past, or you do in your business?
Yes, yeah. Sometimes, and it depends, but sometimes, and what the best time is to do that sort of thing. If someone's coming to town and they're looking to do a particular sort of a development, so for example, they're building a factory to manufacture something, and so therefore they need some industrial land, and they need to meet some certain sort of attributes in terms of road access and services to the land. It's always the best idea to sort of talk to someone like myself prior to sort of nailing a particular parcel of land, or at least having some options for the land, because I've had recent examples where that hasn't happened. They've gone to, or either tried to do it themselves, or gone to someone who hasn't necessarily given them the best advice, and they're left with a little bit of a lemon, or some serious issues where they don't have appropriate access, or they've got objections from neighbours, and it means that the whole process is drawn out significantly. So basically, yeah, you get that advice up front in terms of where you should be looking, or what your options are, and then you map out the process, I suppose, and that can help with the purchase of the land, in that through your negotiation, that you've got a bit of a longer duration to get the approvals, or at least you make it conditional, or there's no need for the purchase to be conditional at all, because it ticks all the boxes, and you've spoken to the water authority and the council, and you understand that there's the neighbours are a little way away, or that the neighbours aren't a problem. So yeah, you're going in with your eyes wide open, and clearly getting a good deal in terms of what you're wanting the land for. And what
it's obviously a pretty complex process. Like it's obviously not just going, oh yeah, no, there's some land, let's just place our business there. There's obviously a fair bit to do behind the scenes.
Yeah, and like everyone's finding in all businesses, there's a lot more red tape.
Yeah.
a lot more opportunity for, you know, things to come unstuck, sort of thing. So things are slower, they're more difficult. So yeah, to do that homework up front is really important.
And are we still, is Mildura still being, was still seen as a place where businesses want to come and set up? You know, obviously in the past, we've always known that we're sort of perfectly placed between Sydney, Adelaide, you know, in that little sort of tri-state area. You know, are we still attracting a lot of big business? You know, are the council opening their arms to big business and saying, you know, come to Mildura and, you know, let's get this economy really kicking?
Yeah, look, when we were leading into this whole COVID thing, you know, I was speaking to other professionals within the development industry, and we were sort of thinking this could be a little bit difficult. We might have to change things up. We'll definitely need to be very careful. But those professionals, such as, you know, building surveyors, consulting engineers, land surveyors, you know, planners, we have all, you know, generally been as busy as ever, and a lot of people saying that really as busy as just we've really ever been, which is quite surprising. But I think that's in part because of the region and Mildura and its location, you know, the attributes that it has in terms of, you know, road connectivity between the states, between the capital cities. And, you know, with COVID, we're away from, you know, those areas that are, you know, been quite risky. So it's interesting, and it's fantastic for the region, for the people that are really busy, and there just seems to be an awful lot of development going on, and people wanting to do things for their businesses to, you know, make them more resilient and to grow them also.
So in a way, COVID's been a good thing for Mildura and potential a potential boom maybe.
Yeah, I think for certain industries, it's been really interesting and really, you know, interesting to sort of see it all happen, and the fact that it's brought about some real positives in terms of, you know, different industry sectors, that, you know, there's a lot of growth there. And, you know, some developments, you know, they take years to sort of get going. So people are just taking the opportunity to say, well, you know, the world may change, the region may change, but we think we're on a good thing because we've done this homework, and we're going to keep pushing ahead and, you know, come out the other side, I suppose.
So good. It's really good. What are the, I mean, I know personally, but what are the big projects that you have brought from like out of town into this region?
Yeah, look,
or helped?
Yeah, I mean, just generally speaking, in terms of what's going on around town, I think a big one that's happening at the moment that we were involved in getting the approval for was the Mildura South Sporting Facility, which is like I think it's
quite a big one.
Yeah. You know, sporting facility with indoor, you know, basketball and other sort of recreational sporting facilities, footy ground, cricket ground, and something that's been spoken about for a long time. So that's a large project that's, you know, not just got benefit for the, you know, the trades and that sort of thing, but the community sort of moving on to the future. And that, you know, that was part of that future planning sort of thing that I spoke about earlier on, that that's been planned for, you know, probably the last, you know, 20, 25 years. And when land is being developed, you know, residential land, you've got to pay your contribution. Part of that contribution has gone towards funding that. Another sort of sector that I suppose we've seen growing a lot is sort of the irrigation and new irrigation development, or new crops that have been sort of moving into the district. There's just been a lot of growth in relation to that, and that often happens sort of in the background a little bit, that you don't sort of see that happening, and it takes a long time for people to get the approvals that are required for that. They're pretty complex because they're often, you know, involving river or cross-border sort of approvals. So there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars going into that annually, and you know, and then the industries that support that or that are part of that in terms of you know, processing facilities of the produce, such as, you know, for almonds and citrus and so forth. And then the other one that we mentioned before, you know, in terms of the the riverfront, and like Mark said, the next stage of the riverfront, and there's sort of whilst council trying to sort of make that happen, there's private industry that's sort of hanging off the side of that. I know people are looking at opportunities for development that would be sort of in and around of that are pretty exciting too. So there are a few key sort of things that are happening that create just a heap more sort of positivity and a lot of sort of community well-being, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really cool.
I think the riverfront has been huge for Mildura. Yeah. I don't know when they developed it. Was it 5 years ago? But once upon a time, I remember people saying, where the hell's the riverfront? Where's the river? They come to Mildura, and when I had a cafe at one point, they would come down Deakin Avenue. They'd come to the centre of town there, and they would literally say, "Where's the river?" Unless they went over the bridge, they didn't know where it was, and everyone used to say we need to make the most of it. And I think that's just been such a positive thing for our town from a real estate point of view, but just a way of life as well. Like I went down there yesterday morning, it was a beautiful day, and there's people everywhere, and it's great to see. So I think more of that, more of that sort of development is just going to be great for our town.
Yeah, and I mentioned community wellbeing. I think it's probably created a little bit of a sense of pride, and the fact that we are capable of doing some things that have come off pretty well, and I just think that it just gives some real confidence to the community in terms of, well, we're actually able to punch that little bit higher, maybe above our weight, and people can move on and do other things for the region.
Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. Cool. So, I mean, really for developers, for anybody really, the planning permit application process it can be lengthy, it can happen quick, but the process is detailed, as Mark said before. And so I think it's really, why would you not have a town planner to try and do, to do that project for you? And saves all the headaches, because there's objections, there's all sorts of things that happen within the process. So, I mean, I would definitely recommend jumping on to James's, his services and engagement. So yeah, I think that's really cool.
It sounds like if you've got a bright idea and you want it to come to fruition and you think it might be great as a business, the first step probably would be talking to someone like James.
Absolutely.
How it can play out, etc. if you're setting something up. So.
And knowledge of the area as well, knowledge of knowing where all the zones are, where you can do things, and there's a little bit of homework and background behind it. But yeah, and James has got a great relationship with council as well, that he can, so it's it's pretty cool. Thanks for coming on today, James. Yeah,
thanks very much, guys. Well done on your little show too. I'm sure you'll go on bigger and better things. So yeah, well done.
Yeah.
I think we're up to 12 million. I'm just looking here, 12.3 million today. It's been a big one today. No, thanks, James. Appreciate you coming on, mate. It's been really interesting. And I reckon if anyone does have questions, about this sort of stuff, they're not sure where to start. They've got an idea that they've been pondering on, and it's someone like James who's got local knowledge with everything when it comes to setting up any sort of business. It's a good place to start. So, I appreciate you coming on, mate.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, we'll see everybody next week. Next Tuesday we'll be back on. I don't know who we've got on, but we'll
find someone special.
Out.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump's next.
Dan Andrews.
All right, guys. See you next Tuesday. Thanks very much.
Ta-da.